Alrighty, so we've got our input done, and we are working on our contact form now, and we're going to need to use our handle submit, and we're also going to have some other stuff going on here too with our on submit. That will be an interesting process. So here's what we're going to basically do. Rather than use that handle submit thing, I'm going to say form on submit equals submitted. And we'll have that, and it'll be mad. It'll be mad. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, so we're not going to do that then. We're not going to have an on submitted all right now. Not even as a placeholder. We're just going to leave that out of the way, and we're going to finish the rest of our HTML here. So we've got this here. We're going to have another one. We're actually going to have 4 of these. And so instead of name here, oh goodness, that's fine. Nope, wrong thing. Okay. Tough to do, tough to do. Let's do this instead. I'm just gonna do like 1 for each of these. And then I can copy this. Oops. Copy this. Do that a couple more times. And then if I highlight the 1, then I can use that and I can change this easily. So this will be email. I need to change one of those later. This will be phone number. And again, anything that gets displayed, I'm not going to want that underscore. And I'm going to do address. So obviously this one, the placeholder, is going to be what our users actually see. So we're going to want that to actually be nice looking, capitalized, phone number. But all the rest of that should be basically the same. It's only what gets visible that gets changed. Now the rest of that should be fine. And then at the end of this, we're going to have a button to submit. And it's mad because I didn't import it. Like that. And then it's also going to be mad because I didn't feed it anything. It's a hungry button. So now it's got children, so it'll be fine. And then we're also going to want to do some styling here. There's quite a lot of styling that we're going to have, I believe. So actually, it's the same stuff as we had up at the top. I believe it is the same as, oh, not here. Is it on the data table? I believe it's all this stuff. Back in. Nope. Contact form. Oh. I don't think that's all of it, though. That's not all of it. Okay, just kidding, I lied. Stop, don't copy paste that. You will do something else. I'm just going to type this out. Flex, justify, start. I'm going to have M-3, BG, slate, 300, P-2, rounded. We'll have hover, BG, slate, 800, and text white. That should be fine there. Oh, my bad. This is inside of a div too, I believe. Yep. So we'll just add that there. Again, that's Control-Shift-P, Emmet, wrap with abbreviation. And I'll put a div there like that. And this div will get a class name, flex P-1. Again, that's just some styling. That's just making it look pretty. Let's go back over here, just have a look, refresh the page, and we'll do update. And now we have a whole form. And right now our submit doesn't do anything. We did not give it any functionality. But you also will notice that it ends up refreshing the page. I don't think we needed anything else. Oh yeah, so that's going to be our on submit because it has a default submit event when you click on it. But right now nothing's being submitted, and that is fine. So we're going to have to create an on submit function. Here's where things start getting a little bit McSpooky. Because this is going to be one of the places we actually start to use some of our server calls for our update in particular and create. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out the best like order to teach these in, because this will be, well, we haven't done that yet, or that yet. So we're gonna actually just go ahead and import our server calls real quick. Import server calls from API. We're not using that yet. I believe, yeah, we use that. So that's good. And then we're gonna have next we're gonna do is we're gonna just use Redux stuff. And then down here we're going to implement Redux stuff. Yippee! All right, and that will require a fair amount of work. But what's cool about this is we are basically done with our components. We got our button, our contact form, data table, index.tsx, input, modal, and our navbar. So we're getting really close. We're getting real close. So we can actually, we still have to finish our contact form. We're not quite done with all of this, but that's our last component to kind of wrap up. So the only things we have left are actually and the data grid, wherever that wound up being. So our data grid down there. And so we're gonna actually need to have some rows for our data grid. So our contact form and our data table are kind of our last two things we have to do. We're getting really close, but we're gonna need to have that data grid show up. And that will take a little bit of work. My contact data doesn't exist yet, so we can go ahead and work on this one too. So we're gonna go to back to our data table, and underneath this, we're gonna have const. Oh, this is different. This is a slightly different thing. I'm gonna actually, we're gonna use const anyways. I don't care. But this is gonna be actually an object, contact data, and get data. Equals, this is our use get data. This is our custom hook. So this is actually, we'll go ahead and do this next. All right, what is use get data? Where do we import it from? Well, it's going to show up in custom hooks. It's going to be a new file. New file, and we're going to call this fetch data.tsx. And we're going to need a index.tsx, or index.ts, sorry, where we export stuff. Fetch data. It's going to be all mad because there's nothing here. And so we'll go back to this, and we're going to import React from React, and then we will export const use get data. It's an anonymous function. Well, not an anonymous function. It's called use get data. Brandon, what are you talking about? It's an arrow function. And we can just leave it with this for right now because the last thing we need to do is import it from custom hooks. So now that exists there, it doesn't know what to do with it. It's like, what's happening here? It's not used. So it's mad. But that's okay because we're going to actually give it some information, or it will do some things. So this is going to actually get our data, and we'll be able to utilize it. So neat. Let's go back down here and finish this out a bit. We're going to import our server calls. Server calls an API. Marvelous. All right. So we're going to use some state here. Const contact data and set data. This is going to be used state. And it's going to be an array that gets kind of returned here. And we want to default it to an empty array, I believe. Oh, this needs to be, hold on a second. I need to put this inside of these. There we go. Use state. Oh no, I didn't invite use state along to the party. There we go. So now we have use state, and so the initial state is going to be an empty array. And or an array of arrays is essentially what we're going to be looking at here, because our contact data, it's not going to be just one thing. It's going to get an array back from this. So it's going to set it default to an empty array, but then again, once we call the API, we're going to get that JSON data back, and that's going to be inside of an array. I'm pretty sure it'll be an array of these. If we go back to just plain regular contacts. There we go. So it's an array. Is what we're going to be expecting here. Neato. So not an array of arrays, it's an array of objects, but it's still this array thing here. Same thing as we had on this here, right? When you're putting this thing in, it's going to be expecting an array. Because we're doing this in an actual function, again, this is just TypeScript shenanigans, but we're going to be getting that back. All right, so async function handle data fetch. And this has no inputs, but we're going to say const result equals await server calls dot get. There it is. This is the line. When we call this function, this use get data thing, we're going to set some data, set data to result. Okay. Now you might be asking, why do we need to make a custom hook for this? Why couldn't we have just done this inside of our contact form or our data table? Great question. Fabulous question. Better question than what is going on here. Fabulous question, because our custom hooks are hooks where we can use multiple existing hooks in tandem, right? Work them together and then call them just once, right? So again, the same way that you say, well, you could write a function to add something and a function to subtract something else and another function to divide something. If you have a repeated mathematical process, you might as well make that into an equation and just use that equation repeatedly, right? That's what we're doing here. And because we're using multiple existing equations together, so to speak, to make a very complicated one, we're going to end up using this all together in this custom hook, right? And so when we ask for the data, it's going to run this function repeatedly rather than running a function. Like, it would be just hard to write this in line with some other JavaScript, right, or TypeScript. And so by making this into a function, we can just call the one function and it will run a bunch of other things for us. That's all we're doing here. It would just be way obviously ugly logic to put that in someplace else. And we might want to use this data someplace else, this function someplace else in our code. So this is our first one where we set the data. Okay, so the result, the contact data is now going to be equal to result. The next thing we want to do is use that function as a effect. Now, the use effect function is one of the most obnoxious and complicated parts of learning React. So we're going to go over this in a little bit more detail here. So let me pause and pull up something else real quick. All right, so what we've got on here, you'll remember this from our kind of our previous lecture series on not to-dos, but sort of our other adventures in React. And you might remember, this is what you're going to remember, right? As I showed you this, we've got these different components, or these different lifecycle methods, right? So as a component comes into existence and out of existence on our screen, which sounds just very mournful, right? Birth, death, the circle of life. But what we're really concerned with, it's just computer stuff. It's not people. But anyways, as our components come into existence and out of existence here, there used to be, when we did object-oriented React, there were these different functions we could use to tell our components what to do based on where in their life cycles they were. Our hooks are kind of meant to replace a lot of that stuff in newer React code. So we used to have component did mount, and component did update, and component will unmount, and now instead we have use effect, right? And so what we've got here is first of all, we got this use effect, and we just have this empty object at the end. And I'm not going to get too much detail about what those objects are. But essentially, this is saying, hey, when whatever it is that we're using the use effect on, whenever that kind of when that comes into existence, at that initial render, this will occur, right? So when whatever we're attaching this to, when this comes into existence, it will log the date. Okay. So it's similar to component did mount, right? The component gets mounted to the DOM and use effect will run. If we don't have this empty array here, right? Then it says there's no dependencies and it will re-render every single time, right? So any time that anything changes in the DOM that affects that element, it will re-render every single time, right? So if you want to just re-render once and not use computational power and refresh constantly, then you're going to want to put this in. But if you wanted to refresh every single time, especially if somebody's like typing something or you're playing a game similar, then you'd be able to use React use effect on that there like that. And lastly, we have one where there's actually a return statement in the middle, and that return statement is a callback. So it's actually going to pass that callback in, and then it will be able to do something when it ends up getting unmounted, right? So this will log after the first render, and again, we got that here. But then inside of it, we've got this return statement with a callback, and then that will end up being removed from the DOM, like component will unmount using a return to callback. I highly recommend you write this down because this is kind of hard to find. People don't actually say this just straightforwardly out on the internet for some reason. And UseEffect is a pretty complicated tool to start using. So just kind of learning to get familiar with these and say, oh yeah, I know which one of these is happening, which one this actually is. It's because UseEffect is three things, right? It used to say, hey, component will mount, or a component did mount, right? And you say, oh, that's going to happen when the component mounts, right? Or the component will unmount. Well, that's what's happening when the component is dying. Or component did update. Well, that happens when it updates. And so while it's technically less writing, I guess, than it was before, I think that UseEffect actually in some ways was maybe a little bit more complicated to learn than the other ones, than the old ways of doing this. And so I just wanted to point this out. This is just a really useful little document here. I don't have it saved anywhere. It's just a thing on Replit. By the way, Replit's really cool. I just want to say I support what they're doing. They have a really good mobile app too. So if you ever wanted to code on your phone, just set up your GitHub, connect it to your Replit account, and you can just clone it, and then you can type on your phone, which is the way that I actually code while I'm doing things like riding on the train, or when my parents put me in my booster seat in the car, in the back of the car, and I'm having a temper tantrum. They give me my phone, and I get to code to calm down. I just use Replit. So highly recommend check out Replit. Very cool. It's just an IDE. It's like VS Code, just it goes online instead. Lots of cool stuff to do there, and works very conveniently with certain AI entities as well. We'll go with that. So anyways, and so now we got this here. So we're gonna actually use that UseEffect thing now, and we want it to be similar to on mount. And so we're going to, which one are we going to use? Probably the one where it happens when it mounts. So we're going to use that first syntax. So we're going to say use effect. Oh, that was cool. Where did that come from? Oh, use effect snippet. I've never used that before, but that is incredible. Cool. Well, we're not going to use that, but I just need use effect for right now. And we're going to hand it a callback, and the callback's going to do some stuff. And it's going to actually handle data fetch. It's actually going to call that function, and it's going to do that when our component mounts. We need a comma there, I believe, is because it takes 2 arguments. Yep, sure does. And then at the end of this whole thing, our useGetData function, our custom useGetData hook, will return an object with our contact data and get data. No. Get data. Did I call everything in here? I need to. Oh, it passed it in right there. That's marvelous. And this will be handle data fetch. Yeah, that'll work. That'll work. Cool. So now we have this tool here, and this is going to basically again pass in our handle data fetch stuff in here, and now we can go back to our because the state is what we're actually getting back, and that use effect, so we're going to be tying to there. So we go back to our data table, I believe. Where were we working before? Got sidetracked. Am I recording still? I am still recording. Good. All right. So yeah, there we go. So you got use get data now. We got our contact data and our get data. So we have that from there. So everything's groovy there. So we should be able to start using this stuff now. Let's see. Open and set open. Our use get data. And I didn't set that one up yet either. So we're gonna go ahead. We're just gonna go ahead and cruise through these, and then we're gonna come back and kind of explain them as we go. Const grid data. Set data, and we're not actually going to use this because we're actually going to use somebody else to handle this, but we're still going to use the state for this. And we're going to take in grid data. Should be fine. So again, this is going to be a data of some sort with an ID coming into this, and that's going to end up being what our grid data results in. And we're actually going to need a selection model because again, we're going to need to be able to keep track of state for like who got selected. If we're like checking things, then we're going to need to be able to do that. for our data grid. So like if I like check a box on the data grid, then I'm going to know, like be able to use that information, which one got checked, which ID got checked, and be able to pass it into other things. So I'm going to say, we're going to say const selection model, set selection model equals use state. Whoa. And this will result in any data type, and it's going to start as an empty array. So this should be fine. One other thing too, I just want to be consistent with some of this stuff. Styling is actually more important than maybe you'd think. Readability is very important, and usually, like if you're the kind of person that's taking the time to try and make sure that it actually all looks right and is formatted in a way that makes sense, then you're probably going to also be the kind of person who's detail-oriented enough to be a pretty good coder. That's been Brandon's opinions, and if you don't like them, I don't care. You don't have to like them. That's just me. All right. We're going to just real quick, so we've got our get data thing here using our use get data. Where are we going to use this? Well, so let's go ahead and I'm going to go const delete data. So this is going to actually, ironically, deleting the data is going to be one of the first places we actually use our get data function. We're going to say your server calls delete selection model, right? And you say, wait a second, where do we set the selection model? We're going to get there in just a second. But again, the delete function, if you go back to our API here, if you go back to this, what did our delete function take? What was its input? Go to delete, and it takes an ID. So lo and behold, we have to find some way of tagging that ID and passing it in to our data table. And the selection model is going to be the specific piece of state that we're going to be using to do that. And so that ends up being just fine. So we are going to take care of that, and then we're going to use get data. No. Stop it. And then we're going to set a timeout. That's gracious. Set timeout. And this is going to be window dot location. So this is going to actually say, hey, where are we actually at, right? Window location dot reload, and so that. And then after that, we're going to wait for 1 second. So it should just take a moment to kind of think about its life, and then we'll reload the page after we delete our data. So that's great. And last thing we're going to do here is going to be console. Ooh, that's terrible. .log grid data.data.id if it exists. Actually, it's going to be just any data type, and then console.log. We'll have testing for data, and then we're going to pass in our contact data, which I don't know if we've established yet. I assume we have. I don't remember. Yes, we did. All right, cool. So use get data is that's our contact data that we actually are getting back from the API, right? So over here in our custom hook, this is where we're getting this information with our get data thing. That's gonna fetch that data for us. That's great. And we come back here. Again, this is a hook, so you gotta keep in mind that handle data fetch is the actual like state function, and the contact data is whatever ends up actually getting utilized. Cool. So that's why it's written all funky like that. All right, so now we got all this. Now contact data is what we're actually gonna be pulling back from that, and that'll be marvelous. But now we gotta actually finish some more of this stuff. So our modal is fine. We can just collapse the, well, I can't collapse the modal. Create new contact. We're gonna need to add a function, I believe. Maybe not. Handle open. Nope, because the modal is gonna take care of that, so that's fine. But we are gonna need our data grid here pretty soon. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this. It will be all mad, and that's fine. We're gonna say rows. It's gonna be set to contact data, right? So this is the thing we just made, right? So again, when we use our when we actually run the thing, it's going to immediately, we're going to have that data available. So it's going to actually call that, and we're going to pass that contact data in, right? So that's inside of this. It's going to end up automatically running that. It's all groovy. So we got our contact data. Our columns are going to be equal to our columns, right? So that's good. And now it's not mad anymore, right? So we can still add some other attributes if we want to, but they're going to be optional things. And we still need to figure out how to target that selection model change, right? So that checkbox. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have rows per page options. Again, this is just stuff that comes from, if you're like, where is he getting this from? Does he just know this off the top of his head? No. This is from the documentation for Data Grid, right? So again, if I were to hover over this, maybe over this, okay, maybe not. It's in the Data Grid MUI documents. Like there's different options you can add to it. And we're going to put in 5 here because that's how many things I want per page. And then checkbox selection is going to be true. That allows me to check the checkboxes basically. And then last thing I'm going to want here is our on selection model change. And what we're going to do here is we're going to have a callback function where there's an item, and it can be any item, any kind of item. And we're going to pass this along, and we're going to set selection model to item. Right. So whatever we end up clicking on, whatever we end up clicking on, it's going to set the selection model to that item, and then we're going to be able to use that selection model right there as the ID for what we're going to end up deleting. Okay, we're going to do this again with our updating here in a little bit too, but we're going to do that on a different page, I believe. I think we're going to have to actually pass that along to our update function, maybe as props or something down the road. I think so. So anyway, so that's what we've got there. But this should mostly work. Yeah, it actually already, the API call already went. We got some other stuff that's getting printed out here. And so this is obviously not super helpful, but those were our 2 console log statements right there. So actually, let me just get rid of these because they're kind of uncool, man. I don't really want to see all this stuff, but we can see that there actually was some data that came through for both of those, and that's great. But now we can see this stuff, right? It's clickable. That's great. It says how many rows are selected. This looks really nice, honestly. And I should be able to just delete this, theoretically, unless I never updated the delete function. I don't think I ever updated the delete function. Yeah, so it just says, yeah, that's not what I needed. I need to run the delete data function here. Delete data. There we go. Right, so now we'll actually run this thing. That's getting used. Everybody's happy. Cool. So I'm going to refresh the page again. And this is where things start getting hilarious because I can start deleting data. And it's gone. It's gone. And it is, in fact, actually gone. So I can't just keep testing the delete thing repeatedly here. But our next step is going to be that create data button. And that's going to be inside of our modal, inside of here. And this is, again, why I was having that issue earlier. And I was saying, hey, like some of the display issues here are a little bit funky with this data table because these borders and these lines end up being in front of everything. So what we're going to do to fix this, it's not the most exciting option, maybe not the most ornate. Where did we, is this on my dashboard? I remember where I put this. Oh, I think I just put if open. So I had, yeah, that's what I did. One other cool thing that we can do here. So we're going to go, this is the first div after the 2 buttons. So it's going to be right here. And instead of just writing this, I'm going to put this whole thing in some brackets. And what we'll have is if it is open, then we'll have hidden. And otherwise, then we'll have all this other stuff. And so this means that if the modal is open, then the class name for this whole thing becomes invisible, right? So again, if I pop this up, now it's all gone. And we can read this just fine. And that looks just fine for me today. That's good enough. Again, there's other ways of doing this. MUI, if we'd use their dialogue, wherever that went, if we'd use their dialogue, that would actually have played along very nicely. But because we wrote our own modal, that ends up with, it's just a way of getting around that. You might be wondering, you might be going like, well, that's dumb. Why'd you do that? Well, it's so that you learned. And you, if you're mad about it, then you can go and show me who's who, and you can go and learn to use the dialogue. That I've shown you the documentation for this stuff. You know where to look at it. All you have to do is figure out how it works and use dialogue instead of modal. And you have to import the dialogue and then make sure that you give it acceptable props. That's the only difference you have to make. You're totally capable. I highly recommend you try that just as a personal experiment. Let me know how it goes. But I wanted to make a modal myself, and show you how that would work. And so we've got that going. And so I think it looks fine. Yeah, anyways, there you go. So, yeah, that's pretty close. But now we got this modal, and what does the modal do? We've got this contact form. What does the contact form do? We still haven't implemented our Redux stuff. And so we're going to still be using our server calls. What's my time at? 30 minutes. Woo, that's a long video. We still got our server calls and all this other stuff. We actually have to use it. And we're going to talk about what Redux is. But we're getting really close to being done. Just a few more of these, and we're going to have some really cool stuff happening here. So, feeling groovy. We'll keep cruising, and I'll see you in the next video.